Hello, I'm Dominic Hobson. My guest today is Scott Thiel, a partner in technology, blockchain and cybersecurity lawyer at DLA Piper in Hong Kong. Our subject matter today is TOKO, a tokenization engine developed by the firm, which has just successfully tokenized as an unregulated security offering a work of fine art by the Chinese artist Wang Xiaobo that was commissioned and purchased by a group of DLA Piper Hong Kong partners. Hello, Scott.
Hi, good afternoon, Dominic.
Thanks for joining us. Now, this was a proof of concept, I understand. What was your primary goal of the proof of concept?
There's probably a few pieces to that. The first was to give the TOKO tokenization engine a true outing in terms of actually generating and creating a digital asset. So there was a technology proof that the engine did what we thought it would do in terms of actually minting tokens and deploying them onto a blockchain platform. So there was very much just a kind of a requirement to establish technology worked, but it went somewhat deeper than that, in that there were a number of aspects of wanting to test the entire ecosystem, and that test is in fact still ongoing. The life cycle of this asset and what we're continuing to do with it is an ongoing piece. But let me just touch on some of the things that we were looking to do in that process. Firstly, there were obviously a lot of legal structures and options around how we structured the token, what economic rights and interests were built into the token, how we wrote a smart contract to then represent those rights. So actually doing the sort of translation of a real world contract into a smart contract and then creating the token itself was obviously an important piece. Some of the other elements of this were really important to me, and one reason why I chose my fellow partners here in Hong Kong as guinea pigs for the project, if you like, was around the whole, user experience, the investor experience. Some people are very familiar with dealing with digital assets. Those that have been trading cryptocurrencies for a number of years were obviously very comfortable with the idea of digital assets, familiarity with things like hot, cold storage wallets, how to handle, how to deal with, how to be comfortable that you aren't going to lose your assets and all of those things. So part of the experience was with it was also to really, help explore that environment and what does the investor experience look like in terms of storage of the asset once you've invested in the project and been issued a token. So we worked very hard to firstly get my partners in the law firm comfortable with acquiring and storing digital assets, but secondly, to really deal with the third-party options around custody and storage of assets. So we looked at putting these assets onto self-storage solutions, including a Ledger Nano device, the Decent device, and then we also looked at third-party custody solutions where we worked with HexTrust here in Hong Kong, a regulated trustee and custodian, and again that provides a way of giving people a place to store their assets and have them secured. So there was a lot of pieces around the whole experience and the end-to-end process of investing in, acquiring, and then storing the digital assets.
I'm surprised you didn't emphasize more coming up with a legally sound structure, because you're a law firm. I suppose I thought that's what one of the objectives you'd have. But are you saying that the legal environment is very well established now?
No, I'm absolutely not saying that. The legal environment is probably the complexity of the answer. I'm now going to give you, seeing as you pushed. We'll explain why I perhaps avoided it first time round. So the regulatory environment is very much dynamic, and it's evolving in many jurisdictions. The other point of, I guess, the TOKO solution and DLA Piper as a global law firm is that this was not we're building a global ecosystem here and a solution for clients across the world. So while we did the art tokenization in Hong Kong, where I happen to be based and with my partners here, there are obviously regulations in different markets that have either evolved at different rates or are still continuing to evolve. So the landscape is complex and still dynamic. Underpinning the sort of regulatory rules around, is a token a security? Is it not a security? What is it? There is also then a whole lot of other reasons for legal structures above and beyond just the whole security question, and whether or not a token is a regulated security asset, where it is not a regulated security asset, what indeed is it, and who can buy it in different markets. Again, regulated assets in some markets can only be bought by professional investors, in other markets by anyone. So there are some real differences, and they're very much jurisdiction-specific differences. But another part of the legal structure where we've done a lot of work is to try and bring some efficiencies into the structure itself. So art is actually a relatively simple asset class in that respect, in that artwork itself is not regulated in any way. If we look at some of the projects we're working on around assets like real estate, for example, obviously real estates are regulated. The ownership of them sit on land registries. There are rules around who can buy, whose interests need to be noted, and all of those good things. So again, some of the legal structures that we've really been working on there are trying to bring some efficiencies, both in terms of the ownership structure and indeed the ability to then subsequently transfer. So we've got an eye on the secondary market piece here, with the ability for token owners to then trade their assets, to sell them from one person to the next. And digital asset exchanges are coming online around the world, and they will be a critical part of that infrastructure. But if we had every transfer of token amounting to a transfer of specific legal interest in a regulated asset, you would have to go back and then update the registry of who are the owners of this piece of real estate, or the equities in this company in terms of an equity token that represented a share in an individual company. So all of those things create stamp duties, they create administrative requirements around updating registers on land registries or corporate registries or intellectual property registries or whatever the asset is. And so for these reasons, actually the legal structures go above and beyond the pure security, non-security piece, but actually looking at what is the most efficient structure to then allow people to firstly buy in the first instance, but then subsequently trade these assets in the most efficient way possible. So yeah, the legal structuring has been a big part of what we've been doing over the last, I would say, 18 months in terms of looking at different options. Again, different markets and different regulatory environments are driving different outputs in terms of what structures would work, but equally different specific assets are driving differences in terms of what would work here, what would work there, what's more cost effective. And then the big unknown as we, I think, move towards this marketplace becoming much more real and dynamic is, what do investors want? So it's one thing to say for a particular asset class, well, people are interested in the economic interest of this asset in a fractional way, but do they also expect some sort of traditional security right? And if that security right isn't provided, is it going to be a less attractive asset? And I think that's an area that we're going to see some evolution of the buy side demand come as well as we continue to look at these structures.
Mm-hmm. You've explained why you chose fine art as opposed to real estate as the liquid asset class you wanted to tokenize, because it's not regulated, and you've been very articulate about the difficulties that other asset classes might represent. Let me just focus on the technical side of the tokenization, the fractionalization itself. Do you feel you've made some serious advances on previous attempts to tokenize and fractionalize liquid assets? And if so, what were those advances?
I think we have, we've really looked at the question of enterprise grade regulated security asset tokenization and subsequent marketplace. So we've come at this, as you might expect, from the perspective of a law firm with a deep understanding of the complexities of regulation, whether it's the real estate regulations for a particular asset, whether it's intellectual property rights laws, whether it's regulation of securities. So we've really come at it with all of the complexity of those legal frameworks very much in mind. And then we've built a technology stack that we believe best addresses those challenges, both in terms of legal compliance, but also in terms of the way these markets will have to operate if they're going to be effective going forward. So to that end, we've actually leveraged technology layers that we think are best suited to those ambitions. In particular, we've used a hybrid private blockchain and public blockchain environment. The private chain environment is built using Hyperledger Fabric toolkit, which allows for controlled access for permissioned white lists of investors who have done their KYC, AML, who then sit in that private environment, but in a way that isn't in public to the entire world, because one of the realities of the public blockchain is that many things that sit on the public blockchain are then going to be accessible to all. So there are confidentiality concerns, there are data privacy, right to be forgotten concerns, and other issues. So that's why we felt that it's essential that there is a private permissioned blockchain environment at the core of this. However, within a private permissioned environment, you lose the benefit of decentralized trust, which is, by definition, the very purpose of blockchain technology in the first place. That we don't need to have a trusted central authority, whether that's us or indeed anyone else. You then create single points of failure if that's the model. So our permissioned environment then, in order to validate transactions, either first-time purchases or subsequent trades, uses the Hedera consensus service, which is a public chain best of breeds consensus model that not only provides a degree of consensus using the nodes that are run by the Hedera Governing Council, but it also brings a number of other features that we think are going to be essential, including timestamping to verify the exact moment in which a transaction can be objectively determined to have been either made or a trade requested. It also brings stability and also finality to a transaction, whereas a lot of earlier generation blockchain technologies, the transaction itself will take a significant period of time to either go through or then to get sufficiently deep into the chain of blocks that we can be certain that the transaction is final. So there are a lot of, we've given quite a lot of thought to those technology pieces and how they will map across to what is, still at this point a nascent but definitely emerging security token ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So if you're operating this as a private permission network, but you're still working with a consensus mechanism, there is a long-term goal here to envisage, I suppose, or actually deploy a public network as well. Is that part of the thought process?
No, we're not looking to build our own public network. As I say, we're working with Hedera. We believe that the HCS service in particular provides best breeds in terms of those the ordering of transactions, the time stamping, the consensus, the stability, and all the other good things that we need. And we're not trying to replicate that technology layer itself. We're just now looking to leverage that technology layer in terms of the way transactions or projects that we tokenize and help bring to market, the way in which they then get handled. We're going to leverage that technology, but we're certainly not looking to build our own public blockchain network. And even within the permissioned environment where we are going to be running a node and some of our key partners will be running nodes, we're not looking to build a sufficiently diffuse series of nodes within that private environment that we would call ourselves sufficiently decentralized. I think the number of nodes will grow as the business evolves, and some of our partners, the regulated parties that we're going to be and have been working with, but we're not looking to build sufficient level of complexity within that private chain environment that we've got our own consensus.
But the model you've created could be adapted to a public network quite easily. Is that right?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. I guess what I'm talking about there is this is the back engine. This is the piece that both helps to build the tokens and also helps to validate subsequent transactions. In fact, the token that we deploy, and this is one of the features of the TOKO engine, is that we can deploy tokens onto different blockchains. So we can spit out an Ethereum token like we did with the painting. We'll be able to spit out tokens, either native Hedera tokens or Hyperledger tokens or other blockchain platforms. And there is a list of DLT layers that we're currently looking at being able to deploy onto. So we're not going to be constrained. And the reason for this is severalfold. Firstly, clients may come to us and say, for reasons associated with who they're working with, that they want to deploy tokens onto a particular blockchain. So we're somewhat agnostic in terms of that layer, and we'll be able to do that. Furthermore, I think there are going to be different applications and different assets that maybe lend themselves better to different DLT layers as well when we get out there. And finally, there is also a need for integration with whether it's exchanges, digital asset exchanges that are coming online. They need to be able to handle a particular token or a particular distributed ledger platform technology in order to be able to list those tokens. So if a client comes to us and says, "I'd like you to help me mint a token," and it has to sit on Algorand because the digital exchange I want to list it on happens to be using Algorand as their standard interface. then we'll be able to do that. So there are a number of reasons why we need to be nimble in terms of spitting out tokens on different platforms.
So you've built interoperability with other blockchain networks and with, I suppose, traditional security exchanges into this model as well?
Yes, that's correct. It's an ongoing process, and again, not only because there are multiple blockchains out there, but there are also intermediaries in different markets that we're working with. And back to the same issue around, because the law is different in every country and most of these activities are regulated in those countries, you need to deal with regulated players. Now, many of the dealer brokers in the world and custodians and digital asset exchanges, they're all quite specific to where they're set up, where they have a license, which regulator they work with. So as we look to do projects in different parts of the world, we're having to build out that network, third parties that we're working with. But that's a process we've been working very hard on over the course of this year, and it's definitely still a work in progress.
Could I ask you about fractionalization? It's obviously a useful thing with illiquid assets like real estate, fine art, and so on. How integral is it, though, to the process of tokenization? Is fractionalization just a kind of feature of tokenization in general, or is it a specific benefit of tokenization?
It's definitely a consequence of the way in which the technology works. So the ability to take an asset and rather than deal with it in one go, being able to say, well, I'm going to turn it into 1,000, 10,000, 1 million, tokens, and then be able to deal with them individually. So it's an inevitable consequence of the creation of multiple tokens that represent a single asset. So in that respect, it's kind of an obvious output of the technology. The perhaps more interesting way of looking at this, and this is what we're starting to hear from the market, and since we've released the sort of announced the TOKO engine to the world, we've had a number of clients and targets that coming to speak to us about projects that they're looking to work on. And the thing that I find without exception interesting is the sheer diversity of aspirations and why fractionalization would work for a particular project or a particular asset or a particular funding requirement. And if I look at the 20 or so projects that we're already in discussions with, they are all vastly different. And even some of the assumptions I think we probably had going into this about why a business would want to do this, why a client would like to do this, why you would like to do a fundraising this way. Some of those things are coming true in some of the projects, and in other projects, people are coming to us and they're going, well, we just didn't think of that. That's a really interesting problem you're trying to solve. And yes, the ability to fractionalize these assets and be very creative about the rights that we build into the token would allow us to build something like that. Now, how the market reacts to those, and will the market want those, and will investor want those particular assets with those particular attributes, I think is an open question as this market gets going. But there is no doubt that the technology layer, which not only allows fractionalization, but then allows us to be quite creative in terms of the rights that we bake into tokens, is every one of these projects that comes to us that looks new, we look at and go, yeah, we can do that. Absolutely, that's going to be really interesting the way we build the tech to make that happen. So it's not it's an inevitable output of the technology, but I think what it's to me is quite interesting is it's providing significant freedom to asset owners and issuers and fundraisers to think about what it is they'd like to actually make available in the market.
So you've got this group of 20 plus issuers who've come to you, they've seen this experiment. They can obviously issue tokens into the TOKO engine, so you're providing the basic service. What other services does TOKO offer issuers beyond the obvious?
We had a lot of debate about TOKO the noun or TOKO the verb, and indeed we had a lot of names that weren't TOKO that we went through as well during the branding kind of process, which you get too many intellectual property lawyers involved in that process, it gets complex. So I think one of the other features of TOKO is that it isn't just a pure piece of technology. Obviously, it's a piece of technology that provides technology services in the form of tokenization. It provides ongoing support with consensus level transaction verification. It provides an interface into which the asset owner, the investors, the third-party intermediaries, whether they're dealer brokers or exchanges, are going to be able to connect and share information. But I think the other piece that's really essential in what we're offering is the one-stop shop. It's the solution. When we, because of the complexity of the different parties that need to get involved in this, a lot of clients that we speak to, they say, well, I'd like to do it, but I just don't know how to start either integrating all of these different service providers, either from a legal perspective or to help scope the role of each of them and where the handoff points are, or to understand the technology. I mean, when I talked about the ability to spit out different tokens, everyone in that ecosystem that's going to handle a particular token is going to need to be able to handle that particular token format, whatever we use for a particular project. So that whole integration level from a compliance, regulatory, legal, and technology integration is really important. And I think to that end, the TOKO service is actually about helping people say, I know I want to do it, I just don't know how to patch it together and bring all these players together. So it's that real kind of glue layer, the GUI layer, as I like to refer to it, where it's pulling together not only the information sharing, but also the different elements of the consortia that needs to get together and work together to make one of these projects a reality.
And what's the TOKO engine going to do for the investors? I assume at some stage, the investors, your fellow partners at DLA Piper, are going to be interested in possibly realizing the value of their investment. At the moment, they're thinking as buy and hold investors, but at some stage they might want to exit. How will that work? How will they realize the value of their investment?
It's a really it's a great question, because I thought they were buy and hold investors as well, but my fellow partners have already decided that they'd like to accept an offer on the particular painting, which was not my plan. And in fact, we're still trying to do some of the downstream pieces in terms of the integration with custodians. But there's already been an offer made, and there is a broad desire to accept that offer and then perhaps buy another piece of art into this structure to sort of prove the life cycle of it. So what we haven't, one of the things we didn't do, which because of this has happened far quicker than perhaps we expected, was to start transferring assets between us on an individual rather than a complete disposal of the asset. So what this will allow us to prove is the issuance of the asset, and then, if you like, the redemption of the tokens, which will be a redemption for cash, because the asset's now been sold, so you get to have your money back plus the uplift. So that's what's going to happen there. One of the things we're probably not going to be able to do because of the speed with which this disposal looks like it's happening is actually deal with individual sales or swapping of individual tokens. There was an interesting piece, because we used a non-fungible token format, which means that every token is actually economically it's identical. You have the same rights, you have the same investor rights, you have the same rights to dividends to the extent that for example, if you hung the artwork somewhere and earned some revenue for renting it out, that would be distributed potentially as a dividend under the structure. And then ultimately, when the asset's sold, you get a return of your fraction of the investment, and obviously people are hoping that investment amount's gone up. So that's those economic rights are identical in every token. However, what we did with the piece of art is we actually chopped it up. We didn't chop up the artwork. We took a photo of it, and we took an individual square of each of the pieces of art, and each token actually has an individual piece of the painting, which led to some really interesting, I'm calling it sort of tokenomics market activity, where same token, but the moment we started, and we did this by a random ballot, literally had to pull it out of a hat. We chopped up a picture and did it. Individual partners were then trying to trade their tokens because they liked that bit of the painting more than they did that bit of the painting. And then great hilarity when my IP partner happened to receive the back end of the horse in his particular part of the painting, and all of the amusement that came from that. It was just very interesting to watch this mini marketplace immediately crystallize in what was at that point a meeting of partners to select it, and to see that even though these were identical economic interests, there could be some real distinctions already starting to emerge in terms of why people would like one token over the next, just because of the picture on the front of it. And that was a bit of an experiment. Again, it's probably another layer of why did we do this, and what were we trying to show. The the thought process gets a little more interesting when you start now. Let's use real estate as an example. You start translating this into, well, they're non-fungible tokens, and each tokens now represent different units or apartments in a building. One that has the sea view, one of which is from the penthouse, and one of which has somewhere else. Suddenly these non-fungible specific attributes become real economic attributes potentially. And again, that's another reason why we use the NFT structure and the 721 token format to start bringing this to life and show what could happen as we use the technology in more exotic ways.
If I've understood you correctly, that the partners are already starting to trade the tokens among themselves only. Is that right?
No, they're not. I was hoping they were going to do that. They didn't. In fact, what's looking like currently happening, and none of this is yet finalised, is that there's been an offer on the particular piece of art. So I think we may just do a disposal of the art, and a return of the uplifted proceeds to the token holders is maybe where we're going. It's not yet finalised, and there's a vote still to be had. But yeah, the individual trading didn't happen, but we will be doing that in subsequent projects. So we're going to be probably using the proceeds to buy another piece of art. In fact, we've already identified it. And at that point in time, we are going to do some of the other life cycles, including dividend distributions, and we'll do some more formal voting rights functions and things like that.
So a third party is offered to buy all the tokens and thereby take ownership of the entire painting. Is that right? And
correct.
How will the cash leg of that work? Is this payment tokens which can then be cashed in for fiat currency, Hong Kong dollars, or how does that cash component actually going to work?
At the moment, it's going to be a fiat currency cash transfer. This particular project was fiat in and fiat out for digital token, but the TOKO engine is obviously going to be capable of dealing with both fiat or cryptocurrency exchange for digital assets for obvious reasons. But yeah, this particular test, proof of concept project was fiat in and fiat out for the security token, or the unregulated token.
But could your model support payment tokens, whether they represent fiat currency or cryptocurrency?
At the moment, it doesn't. It's a very interesting question as to whether we should create our own payment token in any way. I don't. The main reason for doing that, I would think, actually would be our own fundraising, doing our own token issuance, which is not currently planned, but it's something I have in mind. Otherwise, why wouldn't we just use Bitcoin and Ethereum or one of the other common cryptocurrencies to handle, if people wanted payment either to buy in or to exit in cryptocurrency, why wouldn't we just use Bitcoin, for example?
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned you've got a third-party investor who wishes to buy these tokens. Can you give me a flavour of who you expect to be early adopters of this in terms of investors in general? I'm not asking for specific names, just some idea of the type of person who's interested in Hong Kong and invest or elsewhere in investing in this type of asset class.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's one that we're working with a number of clients on, because there is this view that crypto investors are a very special breed, and I think to a certain extent they are when you start talking about cryptocurrencies. However, I'm of the view, and I'm not sure the market necessarily agrees with me yet, but I'm of the view that just because the investment is going to be done in a way that is digital doesn't actually change the profile of the investor that much. And the reason I don't know is the answer. I don't know if we're going to, the investors that we've been speaking to probably are at the more early adopter end of things, and they're quite excited about being involved in a digital project. They're quite excited about this is how I'd store and handle digital tokens, for example. But actually, if you look at some of the solutions we're bringing in terms of either self-storage, self-custody, or third-party custody solutions, these are pretty, they don't look that different, particularly the third-party custodian solution. I mean, you're looking at something that looks a bit like an online bank account. it's got fiat currency, it's got cryptocurrency, and now we also have able to have your security tokens in there. So it's not a huge leap, I don't think, for investors to go, oh, there, I have an account with this custodian, like I would with a bank for my fiat currency, and here it is stored, and I can see it. That's great. So I don't think there's going to be a huge leap in that investor experience, although that's why we spent so much time making sure that back end was there, rather than just saying to people, where's your wallet? Where's your cold storage wallet? Because we're about to send you a private key. It's a whole string of zeros and ones. That's not really going to be comfortable for a lot of people. But having sort of dealt with the reality of here are your options for either self-custody or third-party custody of these assets, actually, the rest of it really comes down to the technology is going to make the deal more efficient. Technology is going to allow us to create products that are unique in the marketplace that don't exist today. The deal is either a good deal for an investor or it's a bad deal. And the use of blockchain and security tokens is not going to make a bad deal good. I think the use of this technology and the reduction in friction and the increase in transparency and data dissemination, all these other good things, has the potential to make a good deal great. So I think that's an important piece. Now, but when we're talking to issuers, they are like, well, hang on, might my normal investors who like to buy my things be a bit nervous about this? And I think it's an open question. My view is no, there may be an education piece here, but if it's a good deal and it works from their perspective, actually the technology should just make things more efficient, not necessarily make it scary, because I think the nervousness is people confuse either unregulated ICO projects or indeed cryptocurrency investing with these things, because cryptocurrencies are volatile. Why wouldn't they be? They are hard to put a finger on why a Bitcoin's worth what a Bitcoin's worth today, and it's almost back up to historic highs again today. Why is that? There's no asset that sits behind it. When we start talking about asset-backed tokens, this is very referable to real-world understanding of, well, this is an asset I know, this is a revenue stream I understand, this is a return on investment I understand. It just so happens it's all happening using this technology that's going to make it faster, better, cheaper. But it isn't actually a fundamentally different asset class like, say, cryptocurrency is, which is a bit of a leap for people, because what are these? Entirely unbacked. There's no nation state backing like you get with a currency. There's no asset that sits behind it. Why is a Bitcoin worth nearly 20,000 today? An interesting question. So I think there'll be an education piece, but I'm not sure that the gulf that exists between investors today and cryptocurrency investors is going to be anywhere near as big as the gulf we see between investors today and those who will invest in solid enterprise grade projects that just so happen to be being done using this technology.
Mm-hmm. On that narrow custody question, does TOKO expect or even insist that the investor brings their own digital wallet, or are you able to supply people who don't have one with a digital wallet?
One of the things that we're doing is bringing options to the table for investors. So we in the project I did with my partners, I did bring them Decent devices and Ledger Nano devices, for example, and we did get them signed up with HexTrust, and so we absolutely did that. I mean, I think it's an interesting question as to how much of that role we could or would perform going forward. I think part of the role we are definitely performing is to try and give the end-to-end solution. Part of that is to make sure investors are comfortable. But I mean, we're not really building a resale in cold wallet solutions. But we can certainly bring it's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about how we would do this in larger scale models, but I'm not going to have a pile of Ledger Nanos next to my desk, I don't think, to be running projects, but we can certainly help build the integration and put people in the right direction and make sure it happens. Because if the investors don't have a solution they're comfortable with, whether that's a cold wallet device they take home and put in their safe or their bank vault or whatever else, and we don't give them something like a third-party custody solution. And there are a number of custodians we're working with, First Digital, for example, here in Hong Kong, around trying to integrate with them. And there are a number of other players in a number of other markets that are they're going to be providing this solution. And investors will be wary. What do you mean I'm going to get a long number that's a private key, and if I lose it, there's a problem? That doesn't sound like a good thing for me. So I've been very focused on that back end piece. As to the role we end up forming in these projects as they get going. I'm not quite sure. You've got me thinking.
Okay. Now you've got these 20 odd issuers who started to talk to you. Can you give us a flavour of the type of assets that they're looking to tokenize?
A remarkable diversity of assets. Again, it's another example of where we thought about, and one of the two original templates for asset onboarding that we built for TOKO are fine art and real estate, for example. They are, again, the back end is common, but the front end of the architecture actually provides fields for completion. And the reason for that is we think there's going to be some real value in this technology in providing greater transparency of the information about the underlying asset. So where we've got, these are the 100 things you could ever want to know about a piece of real estate, and these are the 40 things you'd ever want to know about a piece of art. We've spent some work building those fields so that when we onboard these assets, we can capture all of that information. And again, it gives investors information. It'll give, ultimately, once it gets a more mature marketplace with more assets, people will be able to search, within the art class, I'm looking for these features along this particular feature of this asset class. Can you give me all the paintings that are, rather than just priced, maybe have these attributes or those attributes or whatever else. So we're providing not only transparency and information dissemination, but also the ability to then search across the asset class to pick and filter, what suits my needs as a potential investor. So that's one of the things we built those two. But to your specific question, we have seen a very large diversity of assets. There's been, and from a very large range of jurisdictions. I would say we're talking to people in 5, 6, 7 different jurisdictions around the world already, and the asset classes range from funds to debt to real estate to art to underground mineral deposits, subsea deposits, crops. What else have we got? There are a few others. They're not coming to mind. But the point is, there's actually been quite a diverse range of assets already appearing.
It's relatively unusual for a law firm to be engaged so directly in a project of this kind. I assume a large part of your thinking was exactly what's happening now, that the firm could capitalize upon this experiment by attracting more issuers. Was that the primary motivation for doing this, apart from obviously perhaps your intellectual curiosity, but this could generate business for the firm if you got it right? Was that your thinking, basically?
Absolutely. There's a key part of that, and one of the pieces around this that I think is, my background is actually computer science and electrical engineering, and then I became a lawyer. So I've always been a technology lawyer, and I've always had that kind of interest. So it's perhaps not as much of a leap for me as it might be for traditional, finance or corporate lawyers who haven't really come from that background. And the idea of the combination of law and tech, from my perspective, has been an area that I've been fascinated with even since I can remember, even in the mid-90s as a law student, doing a case-based reasoner, doing some analysis of outcomes of judicial determinations and finding unconscious bias in the results and things like that were emerging from it. So I've always had an interest in the combination of law and technology. DLA Piper itself, through our CEO, has also been very proactive in trying to diversify the focus of the business away from what has become somewhat of a reactive legal business, and so set up a thing called the Radical Change Council a couple of years ago. And I'm a member of that Change Council, and this is one of the projects that's been incubated through that process. So yeah, it is probably a little bit unusual, but it's not an accident. There's been a clear strategic thinking around, we would like to do this. To your point, this is a service that is intrinsically linked to the legal services. And the reason for this is that the technology, while complex, is much more complex for a regulated asset. And hence, that's why we've been building something that is specifically geared towards regulated security tokens and all of the complexity and legal requirements, which will continually move because regulators will be changing the law on us all of the time. We're well built to deal with that. Because we are an enormous global law firm with specialists in all of these areas. Whereas if I was just doing this to spit out cryptocurrencies, unregulated tokens. Well, why would a law firm do that? Now, there are technology companies that can do that and probably do it better than us. But what we've been focusing in on is actually it's the combination of the complexity of these legal issues combined with this technology to mean that you can do a digital offering of a regulated asset that is going to be compliant. That is the unique piece, but they're kind of intrinsically linked together. It's very hard to separate, this technology business from the law firm. It's been specifically designed as being essentially provided with legal services, because if you get it wrong, you'll probably get the law bit wrong before you'll get the tech bit wrong.
Now, clearly the law must evolve to keep up with technological developments, in this case, keep up with blockchain law. And perhaps we can look forward to you writing the textbook on blockchain and the law. But
I just have.
Have you? Oh.
We've just authored the chapters on blockchain in the latest Chambers guide. So there you go.
Okay. Well,
shameless plug.
You must send us a copy so we can review it at Future of Finance. We'll find a lawyer to read it and give us a sense. Well done for doing that.
Sure.
So, given that you have written that book, you mentioned you've got potential issuers.
We only read a bit of this book, by the way, not all of it.
Okay, well, we'll test you only on the bits you wrote then. You mentioned you've got issuers coming from 6 or 7 different jurisdictions. So as you look around the world, do some jurisdictions have a competitive advantage as a result of rewriting their law to keep pace with blockchain? And if so, where do you see those? Which jurisdictions would you mention?
Yeah, there definitely is. And the jurisdictions that have provided a regulatory framework, in my view, have set themselves up to win, so to speak, in this area. And there are markets that are definitely evolved quicker or further. In Asia Pacific, I think that the regime in Singapore is the most mature. Hong Kong is evolving as we speak, but is definitely a step or two behind. One of the things about these regulations, though, always is each person that makes the next move often goes 2 steps past. So there's often a little bit of a leapfrogging going on to support that. But I think Hong Kong and Singapore are the 2 sort of most progressive markets in this region, and I include all of APAC, within that comment. There are some other markets that have got digital asset exchanges up and running, but there isn't a lot happening there yet. Malaysia is one of those, for example. In other parts of the world, obviously, for all of its challenges in the US, with a pretty with the SEC being a regulator that's had raised some issues with some fundraisings in the crypto space to date, but nevertheless, it's a market where there is a framework. There are people who are licensed to do this. The basic infrastructure and regulatory framework is there. I'm sure it could get more efficient, but it is there for sure. And then other markets like Switzerland, and then some of the other smaller places like Gibraltar, etc., are other markets where we're seeing the possibility of doing this. One of the interesting things, though, that we're finding is that just because these are the regimes where they've provided regulatory certainty, they've maybe already licensed players, doesn't mean to say that assets and investors in other parts of the world can't access them. So we're having increasingly interesting, I would say, conversations with players in these markets about, well, yes, but could you handle an asset that was in the Middle East or that was in Africa, or was in? And they said, absolutely, we can do that. We have to follow our rules, and we have to onboard investors here, and we have to have the asset and all the rules here. But it doesn't mean the asset itself has to be physically located in that jurisdiction, and nor do the investors in many cases. That, again, that's a bit of a general statement, but it's true. And I think what could happen is those markets that have created a framework in which there is certainty. And I mean, people often say, oh, well, these laws and regulations create obligations and things that you have to do. Yes, they do, but they also provide certainty. The problem in markets which haven't created the regulatory frameworks is people don't know. And as external legal advisors, we can't say, yep, the regulators made it clear. You may not like it, but these are the rules you need to follow. And then at least if you follow them, you can do it. But the markets that haven't matured so much, there is an uncertainty, and that's something that people don't like doing, is trying to deal with, well, I don't know what the regulators thinking because they haven't yet told me, so I'm not going to do it because I don't want to be the one that gets it wrong and all of that type of thing. So I think those markets that have created the more mature frameworks, and they are, even when I talk about mature, we're not talking about long-term frameworks here. This is all pretty nascent space. But those markets that have created it actually, I think, could start to attract multi-jurisdictional, multinational fundraising projects into their market, even for asset investors outside of their market. I'm not sure if that was the intent of regulators, but I think we're definitely beginning to see that, well, I can't do it here, even though I'm here, but I could do it over there. So let's explore that. And I think that's going to be a reality, I think, over the next while, as people look for, well, where can I do this? I want to do it. Where can I do it? And those markets that have provided that sort of regulatory framework and certainty will I think, therefore attract those projects.
This might be a stupid question, but if a jurisdiction writes a blockchain law, the rights of investors in tokens issued in that jurisdiction are obviously very soundly underwritten by the corpus of law. But is it a complexity if that investor is based in some third location? Does that create a complexity for them, or will that vary from case to case?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's going to be it depends answer on that one. It depends on the regulation we're talking about, what market we're talking about, how the regulation is dealing. One of the things about a lot of regulation is it's by definition domestic in nature. Regulators often and local lawmakers tend to regulate what's happening within the physical boundaries of their market. But by definition, we're talking about digital assets that have a habit of flying across borders, with the greatest of ease. So I think, unfortunately, it definitely raises complexity, but the devil's in the detail in terms of what we're talking about there.
Now, just some final questions about what's going to happen next with what you've built so far. You've got this Aldersgate DLS. It's 100% owned by the partners, by the firm. Are you going to keep that vehicle going and do more experiments of this kind? Is that your plan?
It's very much the plan. Couple of comments. Firstly, Aldersgate DLS is one of the non-legal services companies. The DLS stands for Distributed Ledger Solutions. I think I earn the credit for that acronym we saw at the end of Aldersgate, but there are other Aldersgate entities that are doing, as part of the radical change agenda and the law and agenda, that are doing other things as well. So that's just one of the subsidiary businesses. And one of the reasons for the separation in part is because as a regulated business, lawyers can only lawyer. If you want to do something other than lawyering, you have to do it outside the law firm. So there are reasons why we've had to separate the business out. But actually, DLS would be a typical project model now is if a client comes to us that we would do the legal services from the law firm and we would do the tokenization services from DLS. So it's a dual engagement model where you hire both. They're obviously intrinsically linked, but they are separate engagements. So it's absolutely the plan that DLS is the commercializing entity for the technology services and the ongoing tokenization support that comes with it.
Now, you didn't do all this on your own. You worked, as you said earlier, with Hedera Hashgraph, with BCW, with Luther Systems. Can you just give us a quick insight into what the contribution of those three firms was?
Sure. So, I mean, Hedera is an organization we've been working with for a few years now, really. In fact, before TOKO was even really an idea, or it was, we actually joined the governing council of Hedera, and I think we were maybe the second corporate to actually join that governing council. So we were very, very early adopters of participating in the council, and as part of that, we run a consensus node. So we run one of the Hedera nodes, which we run in a cloud environment, and actually operate as part of the consensus layer within Hedera. So, along with the other corporates that have joined and now running nodes as well, and the Hedera Council continues to evolve. They have been. We spent a lot of time looking at the technology and immediately saw this is, particularly in terms of the consensus service, these are the attributes, as I talked about earlier, that we think are going to be essential for enterprise-grade tokenization. So we thought, let's get involved. So in a way, we kind of reached out to them initially. Hedera have been then extremely supportive in terms of our efforts, both to build TOKO and also to help build the integration. Because as I said before, the whole what tokens sit where requires technology integration, and they've been very supportive with that piece as well. They've also just been a very useful resource in terms of understanding other parts of the ecosystem. There are now many blockchains out there and other distributed ledger technology solutions, and we get a lot of benefit from Hedera in terms of understanding why their piece, particularly the consensus service, does certain things that others maybe don't, and what are the differences between all of these technology layers from their perspective. And we've got great relationships with Manson, Lehman, and the rest of the team over at Hedera. So they've been really great at helping us scale up. And we're also, while I have a passion for this technology, I'm also a lawyer. I'm not a deep skills technology specialist spending my life working in blockchain solutions, although it's drifting that way. And so they've been just a great resource in terms of actually understanding the technology. Luther are we engage Luther to help us with the primary build for the TOKO engine. So again, we don't have the in-house technology resources to build a solution like that using blockchain technology, because our own IT function is primarily busy with the operation of running systems that support the core law firm. So Luther are our systems DevOps and systems integrator who have been building the TOKO engine and are continuing to build functionality within the TOKO engine. And then BCW, in fact, it was interesting, the guys from BCW introduced me to Hedera probably 5 years ago now, so I've known them for a long time, but we've now more recently actually engaged them to help with some of the a fairly diverse range of consultancy support around how we're going to evolve the business, some of these integration discussions, some of the value-added services, downstream asset services that we could potentially now also look to build as well. So they're probably some of the partners, but there are others that we're working with as well, both in and outside the firm. We have a blockchain architect who sits with me here in Hong Kong as a consultant to help try and translate what we're talking about as lawyers with clients that are trying to do deals into how does that map across into being a process map, and what does that process map look like, and then how do we then code that process map. So there, we've got some other resource here as well that's helping translate that kind of legal, commercial compliance requirements into processes that then find their way into the code base.
Now, you've also been doing some work with Tokony, who built quite a reputation, quite a following here in Europe. What are you doing with them?
So yeah, DLA and Tokony have established a partnership. I think must be at least 18 months ago, if not longer now. My colleague Martin Bartlett in London was probably instrumental in setting up that relationship, and would actually answer that question better than I can. I know Daniel and the team at Tokony, and we've looked at a few projects together, but I think probably Martin would be able to give a lot more insight in terms of what we've been doing with them.
Okay, just one final question. I'll go right back to what we discussed at the beginning. This token issue was an unregulated security offering. What do we need to do, or what remains to be done for issues like this to obtain regulated status, either in Hong Kong or in Singapore, in Malaysia, or in any jurisdiction on the planet? What would be the list of things which need to happen?
It depends what market we're talking about. In Hong Kong, it's close, I believe, and we've been working very closely with the SFC. We've had a consortium in there with a project for 6 or 8 months now. Really, it's a very minor tweak in a way. We just need the SFC to be comfortable that one of the aspects for a digital dealer broker license are in fact allowed to issue security tokens. And that doesn't require a change in law. It just requires a change in business scope or the approval of a digital RA1 license type. So it's a relatively small change, which will have a profound difference in terms of the Hong Kong market. But that is the reason why we structured the artwork. We wanted to do it in Hong Kong. I'm here in Hong Kong. My partners were here. We wanted to do it, but because you can't issue a regulated security token now, where you can't use a regulated third party to do that now, we didn't want to go down that path at this point in time. So it's fair to say we're very much ready. for that next piece, but it does require a license. In other markets like Singapore, there is no such impediment. There are already regulated players we're working with there to bring projects to fruition. So I didn't actually mention the UK or indeed Europe earlier, and apologies for that. I should have absolutely done. So we are working with, on projects in the UK and indeed Europe, most recently Germany. One of my partners in Munich has a very interesting opportunity for us there, and it is possible to do it in those markets already. So there are, it's a different. In the Middle East, for example, there isn't. There just isn't a clear framework. No one has a license to distribute a token there, and I don't think it's close, say, as it is here in Hong Kong. So it's very much a country by country proposition at this point in time, and it really does depend on what country we're talking about. I can't believe I forgot the UK and Europe earlier. I shouldn't have omitted them.
But the jurisdiction which gets here first will have a definite competitive advantage, do you think?
I don't know about that. We're crystal ball gazing, I think. I think they have the ability to attract. I mean, I'm aware of projects that are gravitating towards Singapore right now because you can do it right now. And those assets aren't necessarily, those assets aren't in Singapore. Those issuers aren't necessarily in Singapore. So there's no doubt that there is a gravitational pull towards the jurisdiction where it is possible. What that means in terms of early adoption versus other markets looking and learning from the mistakes of those who went first, and then creating perhaps more robust regulatory frameworks or whatever. And I think there are differences of opinion both from a regulatory perspective and an issuer perspective. But I think I'm certainly witnessing a draw towards those markets where there is a route to market.
Scott Thiel, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. Let's make sure we stay in touch. But for now,
thanks very much, Dominic. It's been a pleasure to speak.
Thank you.